We're very glad to have partnered with Fast India and ISF for this event. Before I introduce our honorable panelists, I'd like to quickly introduce the Asian Century Foundation that I work with. ACF was set up in 2019 as a not-for-profit based in New Delhi. Our goal is to improve India's development outcomes by contextualizing examples and learnings from East and Southeast Asian countries. We aim to build capacity for knowledge exchange among India and countries of East and Southeast Asia. We do this by creating avenues for Indian academia to research and for practitioners and policymakers to engage and work with their peers and top experts in other Asian countries. We focus broadly on 5 broad sectors, which includes urbanization, sustainability, skilling, health, and science and technology. In partnership with Fast India, our goal for today's session is to enable exchange of views and perspectives among S&T experts from India and other parts of Asia on the topic of how has science and technology and innovation revolutionized economies. I'd now like to introduce our honorable panelists for today. Our first panelist for today is Honorable Mr. Professor Bambang Brodjonegoro. Professor Bambang is a well-known Indonesian economist. He's the former Minister of Research and Technology, National Research and Innovation Agency of the Republic of Indonesia. Previously, he was the Minister of National Development Planning in Indonesia. Professor Bambang has also held the position of the Finance Minister of Indonesia in the Working Cabinet under President Joko Widodo's administration. Under Mr. Susilo Bambang's administration, he was the Deputy Finance Minister in the Second United Indonesian Cabinet. Professor Bambang, it's truly a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Our second panelist for today is Mr. Masahito Ambashi. Mr. Masahito worked as an official of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. He's worked in the Macroeconomic Affairs Division of the Economic and Industrial Policy Bureau, the Policy Evaluation and Public Relations Division of the Minister's Secretariat, the Energy Strategy of the Agency for National Research and Energy, and several more. He's currently also a visiting research fellow for the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Mr. Masahito, it's truly a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for taking out the time to do this. Last but not the least, I'd like to introduce our moderator, which is Ms. Anumita Raj. Anumita is the Associate Director for Asian Century Foundation. She has 15 plus years of experience in the defense and development sector and has been with ACF for the last 2 years. Over to you, Anumita.
Thank you so much, Smriti, and thank you, Shruti. Good morning to everyone, and especially to our esteemed panelists joining us today from Indonesia and Japan. Your Excellency, Professor Bambang and Mr. Masahito. Once again, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Fast India, the India Science Festival, and the Asian Century Foundation for speaking with us today. Before I start, I would urge the audience to send in any questions for our panelists in the chat box. Our team will try to get to as many questions as possible. As Shruti mentioned, this event is also streaming live on YouTube. A quick point on the format. The panelists and I will have a discussion for about 35 to 40 minutes covering 2 or 3 broad questions. And we'll reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. The aim of this panel is to explore the role that research and innovations in the field of science and tech can play in accelerating economic development in countries, specifically focusing on an Asian perspective. Since the Industrial Revolution, technological advancements have occurred at a rapid pace, and alongside this development, countries and economies have boomed, global power balances have shifted as a result. In Asia, Japan and Indonesia stand to offer us vastly different perspectives, with Japan having undergone a remarkable technology-assisted boom in the 20th century that continues to bear fruit even now, and Indonesia being at the precipice of enormous development in the 21st century. However, historically, breakthrough innovations or technologies alone have proven not to be the key to large-scale economic transformations. Instead, what we've seen is that focused policy programming to invest in systems that promote research, building institutional and individual capacity over years, sometimes decades, and building the right atmosphere to allow the private sector and markets to quickly reap the benefits of commercialization are all necessary in equal measure to promote sustained economic growth. With this in mind, I would like to start the panel by asking both panelists, how have developments in science and tech influenced economic development in your country? I request you to keep your initial remarks to around 5 to 7 minutes so that we can explore further in discussion. Professor Bambang, if I can request you to speak first, focusing especially on Indonesia's experience in the last decade or so.
Yeah, thank you, Anumita. And also it's an honor to speak on India Science Festival. And of course, I'm glad to discuss about the role of science, technology, and innovation in Indonesia economic transformation. As you are well aware, I think Indonesia is still considered less industrialized country because the contribution of our manufacturing to GDP currently slightly less than 20%. And I think it is not yet at the level of industrialized country. So when the everybody in the world is already in the Industrial Revolution 4.0, and Indonesia, of course, facing the digital transformation, the first thing that benefits the Indonesia, I believe, would be the role of digital technology in accelerating the economic growth of Indonesia, especially in empowering the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Sometimes people mistakenly made a program about empowering MSME by saying that, yes, we already have certain millions number of MSME. That's not the important thing. Of course, it is important to increase the number of entrepreneurs. But more important thing, how we can create the improvement of the existing MSMEs. And then with the help of digital technology, we know that digital technology will empower and will accelerate the improvement at MSME, meaning that when you start as a startup company now, of course, in digital or in any technology-based activities, then usually you will be considered as maybe micro level or small level. And in most cases, prior to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, many companies remains in their initial position, meaning when they start micro, they will stay in micro for a long time. Similar when they start small, or let's say they improve to small, they will stay at the small level for long period of time. But with the help of digital technology, as you can see in our slide presentation, now you can witness the birth of unicorns. And if you remember, those unicorns were basically part of MSME, maybe just a couple years ago. But because of the technology, because of the role of science and technology, now they are part of the unicorn. They are part of, let's say, medium to large size of companies, especially in Indonesia. And then there are 4 factors from the digital technology that accelerates the growth of MSME. Namely, first, the e-commerce. Of course, the e-commerce technology is not new, but it really helps because now people feel comfortable to do any shopping activities through e-commerce. And we already have few unicorns in e-commerce. Similar with the share economy. Previously, of course, we are quite strange with the idea of share economy. But because of digital technology, now share economy becomes common word. So as a result, we have ride-hailing like Grab, like Gojek in Indonesia. And also for accommodation, we have Airbnb. So, of course, there are a lot of things that created because of the digital technology. As well as, of course, the marketing, the campaign now can be done through social media instead of using, very expensive way to do the advertising. And then, of course, the backbone of all digital technology is cloud computing. Because of cloud computing, all this digital technology could happen and could accelerate the MSME. So I would say that digital technology is very much critical, and especially in the case of Indonesia, our MSME contribution is not small. 64 millions of MSME is basically, there are 64 millions of MSMEs in Indonesia, almost all of them self-employed and micro, which of course needs the help for digital technology. And the total contribution in terms of GDP to Indonesia's GDP, almost more than 60%. And then in terms of workforce, they contributed 97%. And in terms of total export, they contributed 50%. So their contribution is very significant. And I think the role of science and technology and innovation, especially in digital technology, will accelerate more the MSME. and of course will help the economic transformation in Indonesia. I think that will be my initial statement for this discussion. Back to you, Anumita.
Thank you, Professor Bambang. If I can just follow up on that a little bit, that was a very interesting snapshot that you just showed us. Specifically, you mentioned how digital technologies are currently driving and will in the future prove to be the key to accelerate MSME growth and empower them with multiple tools. Can you talk a little bit about your experience having been in the government? What kind of policy tools are available to promote this kind of digital innovation, to promote MSMEs?
Yeah. First of all, of course, the government, for example, now has basically the new programs totally different from their previous program. The name of the program is MSME digitalization. So by certain efforts, government trying to focus on digitalizing the MSMEs. And the reason is because of the pandemic. Because during pandemic, a survey revealed that the companies with some exposure to digitalization or to internet, for example, will survive better than the companies, than MSMEs that do not have any exposure to any digital connection. So as a result, one way to make sure the MSME can survive during pandemic is through digitalization. And then we also realize digitalization, as I mentioned, will also accelerate. So that's why the government focus on that. And second thing, of course, government needs to create more digital talents. We understand that because of the high demand for a digital business, some of big Indonesian companies in digital or even some startups now still rely on foreign-based kind of expert or foreign-based specialists. Of course, it's okay for short to medium term, but to medium for long term, I believe Indonesia needs to have its own talent. And that's why the government through Ministry of Education trying to enlarge the number of the talent programs. So in the future, hopefully Indonesia can fulfill at least the basic demand for digital economy.
Thank you so much, Professor Bambang. I'll move on then to Mr. Mashito for your initial comments.
Okay, I would like to use my slide. Is it okay? Sure. Okay.
Please.
Okay, so I would like to introduce new industry innovation and technology policies that affects developed countries, including Japan. My name is Mashito Ambashi, Associate Professor of Economic Research Institute, Kyoto University, and Research Fellow of ERIA. My research interest is industrial economics, industrial policy, innovation, and economic development in Asia. Okay, next. Okay, next. Okay, my talking, before starting my presentation, my view does not represent opinions of any organizations of those which I belong to in the past. I cite many materials from those provided by the METI of Japan without getting permission. Okay, my talking point focuses on what is new industrial innovation technology policy, IIT policy. Before that, I will briefly touch on the background change in the world and the changing views of academia and the political circles. I will introduce the new trend of IIT policy in the US and Japan. Finally, I will conclude by mentioning the future of science, innovation, and technology.
Dr. Mashito, okay. If I can request you to the very last point, the future of science, innovation, technology, if you can talk about it later when we come to that.
Okay. There are large background change in the world when we discuss IIT policy. First, uncertainty rises worldwide since the 21st century. Second, developed countries are annoyed by secular stagnation and rising inequality. The third point is rapid technological changes such as digital transformation and fourth industrial revolution. Fourth, some countries pay attention to large impacts of nationally led IIT policy. Fifth, we encounter geopolitical, geoeconomic risks, for example, technological competition among great powers. Sixth, climate changes and environmental problems are becoming serious. Okay. Okay, in recent years, the concept of new IIT policy has emerged in academia, especially in the context of industrial policy. Professor Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Memorial Prize winner in economics, has long stressed the role of industrial policy in promoting learning in society. Notably, Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who is an up-and-coming economist in University College London, sheds light on IIT policy based on a mission-oriented approach. She argues future economic and industrial development depends critically on decision-making of today's IIT policy. Okay, more concretely, according to Professor Mariana Mazzucato, the states should conduct groundbreaking innovations with ambitious moonshot programs by taking risks that private businesses cannot. She emphasizes this entrepreneurial state needs to set grand mission, facilitate a wide range of resources, and create and shape markets. The conspicuous example is the US Apollo project in the 1960s. The initial aim of this project was to land human beings onto the moon, but at the same time, it created relevant industries such as software industry. The role of states is fundamentally important in forming innovation ecosystems in which a variety of firms, workers, research institutes interact and cooperate under government IIT policy. Furthermore, I would like to give a different viewpoint regarding the iPhone. Despite the important role of innovators in Apple, the elemental technology of iPhone stems from past government investments. The internet, GPS, touchscreens, and automatic sound recognition devices depend on government-led research and development. The political circle in the US is also changing. Mr. Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to the President, published his paper, and he advocated large-scale IIT policy in the US. And he states governments should focus instead on investing in large-scale missions like putting a man on the moon or achieving net zero emissions that require innovations across many different sectors. Okay, I don't explain the details, but the table shows a summary of American jobs plan in the US that is still under discussion. However, the US government attaches importance to R&D with a large budget. It plans to invest in the National Science Foundation in the field of semiconductors, advanced computing, communication technology, etc. Okay, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI of Japan, demonstrated its tentative idea on radical innovation in economic and industrial policy. Although I do not explain all the details of the idea, the point is the new policy framework is different from those in traditional industrial policy and structural reform approach. The objective of IIT policy is to solve societal and economic issues in the medium to long term as indicated by the mission-oriented approach. The theoretical rationale is that the state needs to address uncertainty, shape markets, take risks, and promote private sectors, crowd-in effects, and technology development should create ambitious, disruptive innovations. This has not been the master plan of the whole Japanese government, but proposes a new possible direction that IIT policy should take in the future. Okay, I will eliminate my summary. So this is my first opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mashito. Let me ask you a follow-up question. Specifically, you spoke just now about this mission-oriented approach that, for example, put a man on the moon and alongside it, lifted all other boats in technology. And you said in the current day that could be perhaps creating, a large-scale energy transition or trying to achieve net zero and so on. Do you see any problems with this approach? What are some possible challenges with this kind of approach?
Okay, so this kind of approach emphasizes the importance of government power. But on the other hand, economists normally attaches more importance on market power. So I think it is important to take a better balance between market power and government-led approach. But in the past, retrospect to the past, many developed countries now reflect the problem of neoliberalism policy and market free policies, it's okay. But recently, there are many problems. I also mentioned, like uncertainty, technology competition, geopolitical problem. So now developed countries now more shed light on mission-oriented approach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mashito. If I can request you to stop sharing the screen so we can all, we can come back to it when we're specifically speaking about the future. Professor Bambang, any response from you on this idea of a mission-oriented approach? You, of course, in your former role would have been the kind of person who would architect some of these large-scale missions. What is your response? Does it work for a country like, say, India or Indonesia, which is still, further behind on the development curve compared to, say, a Japan or the US? What is the perspective from a developing countries angle?
Yeah, I believe the so-called mission-oriented goals doesn't have to be, the scale like the Apollo project, like what US did in 1960s, or any other projects that following that. Of course, we understand that some of the high technology, I just learned now that many of the so-called digital technology actually is a derivative of military technology. So initially, the technology is dedicated for military purpose, but then they can be developed for a private purpose and actually becomes the so-called the advanced technology. So it means when you say the mission-oriented goals, I think for countries like Indonesia and India, which are still in the stage of developing or emerging economies, I think we can still adjust the so-called the mission-oriented goals with our capacity. For example, in Indonesia, then the idea is the mission-oriented goals should be directed to make Indonesia as industrialized country. Because so far, especially after Asian financial crisis 1998, Indonesia suddenly slipping away from the idea of being industrialized country, and sometimes we are going back into natural resource-based country, which I think will not be sustainable. So with the idea of creating sustainability, then we need to pursue Indonesia as industrialized country. With that, that is the mission-oriented goals, I mean, being industrialized country. And by doing that, we can select some of the sub-manufacturing sector that should be Indonesia priority based on the advantage that Indonesia has, for example, the raw material, as well as the size of the market. I think Indonesia and India are in a good position to have strong manufacturing sectors like China case, because we have such a big domestic market that could create some kind of the economics of scale, before we compete in the global market. So I think we can do that. And of course, the role of science, technology, and innovation will be very much important, because now is the game of innovation rather than the game of so-called comparative advantage in the past. I think that's already really the past. Now is the game of innovation, and the ones that, trying to develop innovation continuously will be the winner.
Thanks, Professor Bambang. That's a very interesting perspective. To follow up a little bit more, Dr. Mashito, I think the next question that I really had is, of course, Professor Bambang was able to offer us the experience of a developing country like Indonesia. For a developed country like Japan, which is, as I mentioned, had its big boom in the 20th century already and is now continuing to reap those rewards. How do you, alongside this sort of mission-oriented approach, really focus on basic science research? How do you keep that promoting? How do you keep promoting that and ensuring that new technology breakthroughs will come out of Japan rather than any other country? So essentially, I'm asking about research for the sake of research, especially if you can give us a current day perspective from Japan, focusing on maybe some of the interesting sectors in which this research is happening. I think you mentioned, for example, green technologies or EVs, etc. These are some of those fields. If you can elaborate a little bit more on that from the perspective of a country like Japan, which is quite further along in the development curve.
Okay, so in Japan, on the one hand, most scientific breakthroughs are made by researchers in universities and public research institutes, and on the other hand, a few sometimes are made by private firms researchers. So scientific findings in private firms are smoothly applied in research and commercial activity. And however, there is still a challenge in Japan in connecting academic research outcome to private businesses, especially MSMEs. So laws and institutions have been arranged, such as technology license office law for private businesses to utilize innovations achieved by universities like that. Okay, so the second point, yes, Japan have been facing difficult economic and societal challenges for 30 years. It is said that Japan is a developed country with future grand challenges, global challenges. So the biggest concern for Japan is rapid aging and decreasing the number of children. The younger labor force will be deficient in near future. So in Japan, technological development switching to this society is strongly required. So the decreasing number of populations will make it difficult to maintain public services in rural regions. So on that point, the electrical vehicles and automatic transmission cars may help future people to live in their comfortable lives. Challenges that we Japanese face will drive science and technology innovation in conjunction with pure research. So I think that this is also a balance between basic research and applied research. Applied research is led by a mission-oriented approach, but with societal goals and economic goals. But yes, and there are two approaches: basic research and mission-oriented applied research. So now Japan has many problems. So, but on the other hand, these problems may lead Japan to more scientific and technological countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mashito. You mentioned something very interesting that I want to follow up with Professor Bambang on, which is that Japan has an aging population. Indonesia and India, on the other hand, we have enormous youth potential. And I think some of the questions in the Q&A have also reflected that, because many of our attendees are very young. They're all eager to start their careers in science and tech policy, etc. So Professor Bambang, how do we develop this capacity? How do we make sure this capacity doesn't go to waste? How do we, if we see countries like, say, Japan or China or South Korea, what they were able to do is think of the technology that they might be working on 5 years, 10 years ahead, and using that, reverse engineer the kind of talents that they would need and promote those kind of degrees, promote that kind of sector in high school and in college. How do we build our capacity? What is the Indonesian perspective on that? I think it would be very interesting for India, because we also have a huge young population.
Yes, you are correct that Indonesia and India have very big youth population, and in our case, Indonesia actually is a demographic bonus right now until probably 2030. And if I try to so-called copy the Japan and Korea model, when they are getting out of middle income trap and becoming high income country or developed economy, they did that while they were enjoying demographic dividend. So of course now Japan is an aging society, but in the past when they are experiencing demographic bonus, that's the time when Japan getting out of middle income and becoming high income country. And if we follow that trajectory, then of course what we have to do is to make sure that our younger generation directed to the so-called future sectors. In the case of Japan and Korea, I think the so-called future sector for them is clearly manufacturing, especially in automotive and electronics and also high-tech industries. But of course, for the case of Indonesia and India, things could be different, because our future is of course different with the future of Japan and Korea at the time. Our future now actually is the digital technology, is the Industrial Revolution 4.0. It means both Indonesia and India needs to strengthen, as I mentioned earlier, digital talent. But secondly, the most important thing, we need to create a new generation of entrepreneurs in the digital technology. We already witnessed, as I mentioned in my presentation, that Indonesia has now, I think, few unicorns not only in e-commerce, but also ride-hailing. And lately, we also have new unicorn in F&B, food and beverage. It means there is already a new generation of entrepreneurs that hopefully will be different with their father or grandfather, because in the past, the so-called big business in Indonesia usually relies on natural resources, either in mining or plantation. But the new generation or younger generation, now they try to define themselves as the entrepreneurs more in technology-related business. And I think it's a good start. Whether both Indonesia and India will be, out of middle income trap sometimes in the future, of course, still remains to be seen. But at least we already had a good foundation. Now, our job is to make sure that the foundation will be strengthened and the talent, digital talent will be developed continuously. And of course, last but not least, we need to have more entrepreneurs. Copying what Japan and Korea have been doing, and lately China, the key is on entrepreneurship. And now we have the new group of entrepreneurship, mostly in digital technology. And I think it will be very promising.
Thank you, Professor Bambang. That's so interesting. Dr. Mashito, any response from you on that before I move on to my last big question?
Yes, as Professor Bambang indicates, the importance of entrepreneurship and MSMEs using digital technologies is, yes, I agree with that. But I would like to add that, yes, in Korea, in South Korea case, they have, I think the South Korea government invested much more, conducted much more investment in technological and development. I studied the relationship between income per capita and the R&D intensity. When South Korea was middle income, the R&D intensity is higher than that of now Indonesia or Vietnam, other ASEAN member states. So I think yes, there is some room for developing countries to secure some investment in R&D. But this is a balance, also balance with others of budget spending with, for example, so infrastructures and promotion of MSCs. But I think there is some room for scientific and technological investment in developing countries. This is also the key to escape from the middle income trap for these countries. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Mashito. I think then the last broad question before we switch over to trying to address some of the Q&A is, what does the future hold? From an Asian perspective, from an individual country perspective, from a global perspective, what does the technology landscape look like in the next 20 to 25 years? What are some of the big areas or avenues of exploration? Are there any major scientific breakthroughs that could completely change how countries operate? What is potentially the reshifting of power balances in the world as a result of technological innovations and economies booming as a result? If you can give me your sort of take on what you think the next 20 to 30 years, say up from now until 2050, what does it look like for your country and for the region, and possibly if you have a global perspective also? Professor Bambang, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first interesting thing is, I think the one that I learned from Japan, the idea of Society 5.0. I believe it's already quite close. In terms of technology, in terms of the capability of utilizing the so-called Society 5.0. But let me share, if you give permission, for my presentation, page number 4, please. Yeah.
You should be able to,
this one, page number 4, Okay, I believe these are our future. Not only for Indonesia or developing economy, but basically for the global future. First, technology related to the health system. I believe the so-called telemedicine will be the mainstream for the future. rather than the conventional medicine that we are facing right now. And in fact, the existence of pandemic created the acceleration of this telemedicine. Secondly, of course, this has been done in many parts of manufacturing as well as other services sector, automation, acceleration, and digitization. I think we have discussed quite a lot about digitizing the MSMEs and also automation in manufacturing. And I think the automation itself will be interesting for even aging society. So in the country with aging society, for example, Japan, I believe they can still maintain their advantage in manufacturing through automation. And in fact, automation in manufacturing now is the key for winning the competition. Third, about the role of artificial intelligence and big data. This will be part of the society 5.0. But more important thing, the data will be so-called the future gold mine. And then everybody now is trying to get the data as much as possible. But of course, data is just raw data. The most important thing is to create the artificial intelligence. So it means the business or the technology related to artificial intelligence needs to be developed in order to utilize the big data that's available from any digital transaction. Fourth, this is about global value chain. And I think it will be interesting, because after the pandemic, there will be kind of shift in the global value chain. Of course, it depends on the type of industry. If you are talking about high-tech industry, actually what going to happen would be reshoring. They will be back to their origin country, the ones that created the product itself, rather than moving to other countries. So the idea of reshoring, regionalization, as well as diversification will happen in this global value chain. And I believe some of the developing economy will take advantage of this in order to strengthen their manufacturing sector. And of course, the next thing is the one that we are doing right now, telework trend improvement. And I believe this kind of webinar, international conference, even now Indonesia is the host of the G20. And we have to do some of our G20 activities online, with all this kind of Zoom virtual meeting. And of course, this will be not only during the pandemic, but it could be part of the future trend, at least hybrid. So it will telework trend improvement will be very much important. Last but not least, I think you already mentioned a little bit about the green recovery. Of course, we are talking about what Ambashi-san mentioned about electrical vehicle. We are talking about renewable energy. That will be, of course, the technology for the future. So I believe the shape of future technology will be influenced by these 6 phenomena for the development of the technology itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bambang. That's so interesting, and it's such a succinct way to present it. Over to you, Dr. Masahito. What do you think about the future?
Yeah. So in future, I think we should direct technological development, direction, and speeds. As we know, there are many many inequalities in developed countries using machines and replacing human beings. So we have to adjust technological development to increase and enhance the development and social welfare. I think this is important. So I think also digital is a key that can be applied to many sectors like, yes, carbon-free energy, EVs, biotechnologies, robotics, and digital healthcare, education, and so on. So we have to accommodate people to technological development, and we have to change economic and industrial and social structures to better utilize technologies. And also, I think, yes, people who can use digital technologies have more chance in developing countries to work for other locations virtually. Like, so now we have free license from developed countries like translations and like that. These kind of things are made by, can be made by digital technology. So in summary, my opinion is that we should direct technological development direction and speed. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. We have about 15 minutes left, so I think it's a perfect time to take some questions from our audience. Maybe Shruti, I can start with you. Are there any interesting questions from the social media that we've received from social media?
Yeah, there are two questions that have really come up, and they're directed towards Dr. Mashito, mainly regarding the challenges that Japan faced when it was really directing all of its resources towards the economic growth, and when it was in its developmental stage, what are some policies that were implemented that worked really well? And of course, there's one question for Professor Bambang, and it says, what are some ways that Indonesia and India are working together to promote countries' collaborations, and how are the two countries supporting each other in S&D growth? So these are two questions that we picked up from social media.
Thank you, Shruti. Dr. Mashito, you first, perhaps?
Yes, the question is about what policies for challenges toward economic development. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. So in Japanese case, there were many challenges. We experienced many challenges, like also pollution and now aging society. But in pollution's case, it is very difficult for private companies to address pollution, because this is also like the problem of coordination, and the investment in addressing pollution is the return is very smaller than the social return. So yes, we have to correct market failures. So this is the role of government and government policies. And of course, we have to direct private companies, private firms to societal challenges. So in aging society now in Japan, this is also an opportunity for private companies to serve new services, provide new services, or like healthcare or new medicines, like that. So in any case, the policy is generally a coordination for government, private sectors, and research institutes in promoting technology, innovation, and science. This is also totally grand challenge of policies, but the individual policy is more specific. So I would like to skip that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mashito. Professor Bambang, the question for you is, I think, how do India and Indonesia collaborate right now, and what is the future? What could we be doing to collaborate better, especially in the field of S&T?
Yeah, the first would be about the digital talent. I think both of the countries, with the growth, with the very fast growth of digital technology, needs a lot of digital talents. And creating digital talents, of course, is far from easy. I mean, it requires a good education system, not only at the high education level, but also maybe from the elementary school. So all the education system needs to be transformed, and of course, we can learn from each other about how to create digital talent from the youth perspective. I mean, doesn't mean that you need to have, let's say, bachelor degree in computer science in order to be an expert or a specialist in the digital business. You can do it even when you are still in the middle school or even in the high school. Secondly, of course, entrepreneurship. I mean, with the size of our countries, aside from the digital talents, we need much more entrepreneurs. And of course, talking about the future entrepreneurs, aside from, of course, the many business opportunities that we already know, of course, we are talking about the digital business for the future. And with the combination of research, the science, technology, and innovation in both countries, I think we can create some kind of strong power in generating the new digital business. And of course, the most important thing of the business is the entrepreneurs, is the owner of the business or the initiator of the business. And we hope we can witness more and more startups coming from both countries, and those startups should be well equipped with their digital talent. Last but not least, of course, we are talking about, again, industrialization. At the end of the day, of course, digital technology will be very much important, but still, industrialization is very much important. And now we can combine this industrialization with digital technology. In this case, of course, both countries can learn from each other because the competitive manufacturing products in Indonesia could be different with competitive products from India. So it means we can learn about the technology from each other, as well as learn how to distribute, how to market the product globally. Because, of course, our domestic markets is so huge, so interesting, but at the end of the day, we still need the so-called foreign exchange earning, meaning that we have to compete in the global market through export and, of course, through promoting, keep promoting our product in the global platform. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Bambang. Dr. Masahito, there's a related question in the chat box, which is, given Japan's advancements in the field of S&T and given its overall developed state, what do you think Japan's role is in working with developing countries to promote their own technological capacities and research? Whether it's through, JICA, which is your overseas development agency, or whether it's through your own ministries as a part of focused trade or economic development. Specifically, how do you think Japan can play a role in developing the tech capacities of developing countries?
Okay, so there are 2 points in Japanese perspective. One is official development aid to developing countries. Of course, this is including this includes education, technology and science, innovation. This is also aid grant from Japan to developing countries. The second point is more important. I think so. The Japanese companies and developing companies, companies in developing countries are win-win relationship. Actually, many Japanese companies made investment to developing countries, and of course, they make a spill over to the local companies for technologies and human resource development like that. Yes, I think also it's important for developing countries to attract more high-tech Japanese companies to assimilate technological development from spillovers from Japanese companies. So I think also both governments between Japan and developing countries establish a win-win relationship to enhance both private businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masahito. I think then we have one last question. Maybe we can address this. Professor Bambang, the question is, from a developing country's perspective, how do you balance, limited resources? With limited resources, how do we balance R&D investments? Do we focus on fundamental technologies that require long-term investments, significant investments over a long-term horizon? Or do we focus on new and emerging technologies that are already surfacing in the market, but may not require as much support because they're already sort of bubbling through the surface? How do we balance this?
Yes, I really like the question because it's basically the challenge that Indonesia is facing today with the budget limitation for R&D. I think Ambashi mentioned about the best practice in Korea that I think they allocated almost more than 4% of their GDP for R&D, which is the highest in the world, compared to Indonesia that now maybe we can only contribute 0.3% of our GDP. So to balance that, I think I agree with your later option which is Indonesia focusing more on reverse engineering and focusing on the technology that already developed somewhere, while we are focusing on first how to adjust the technology for domestic use and how we can develop the technology related to the business activities. While on the other side, we might pay some attention to the so-called basic research, but not all types of basic research. I think one of the potential basic research that can be done in Indonesia, for example, related to our biodiversity. Indonesia is known to have the highest biodiversity in the world. Number 1 and number 2 is Brazil, I believe. With this highest biodiversity, of course, there could be many potential value added. And of course, the value added cannot just come just like that. You know, you have to do a good research and then do the downstreaming of the research product to the prototype and at the end going to the industry. Of course, it will take a long time, but I believe with the variety of our biodiversity, we need to emphasize our basic research on biodiversity to create the potential value added, while at the same time, we are focusing on the so-called reverse engineering and R&D more on the proven technology. And of course, the resources, I mean, the budget doesn't have to come 100% from public sector. We can ask private sector to cooperate by, for example, giving them tax deduction. Now, Indonesia has the scheme of super tax deduction if the company would like to have the R&D and coming up with the, a product, research product or innovative product that has, the rights, patent, and of course, at the end, it has to be in commercial states. So I believe that kind of balance that Indonesia has to maintain as developing economy.
Thank you so much, Professor Bambang. I think then, Dr. Masahito, anything that you can offer us from Japan's example, when Japan had limited resources, how to balance?
Okay, so although I said there is some room for developing countries to increase innovation investment, there is also a device that makes innovations in societies and in economies. For example, in Indonesian case, so local strengths, there is some local strengths like agriculture. So these industries with a clear mission can create innovation. So I think also the budget is some kind of limitation, but this is not always a limitation. So we have any other devices like government procurement to get private investment, private companies, products. And I think I also said that foreign direct investment can be used to assimilate technological development from foreign companies. So yes, I think so in Japanese cases, we also used many devices, not only investment in technology science, but also devices and mechanisms to increase innovation. So I think so all countries, including developed and developing countries, learn about how we increase innovations with each other. Thank you very much.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on, Dr. Masahito. I think the idea of all of us collaborating to find the path forward. I think then, before I wind up, anything from Shruti and Sarah from Fast India?
Thank you so much, Anumita. Just very, very grateful to both the panelists today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we had so many questions. The Q&A box is absolutely buzzing, but we only wish we had more time to spend with the panelists and hear about their work and, of course, all of the future of S&T and how it's really contributing to our economies. But this is really great, and I'd leave it to you to give a concluding address and thereafter take away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shruti, and thank you to Fast India for helping us organize this panel. The India Science Fest has already gotten off to a great start, and we're looking forward to a couple of more weeks of very exciting events. You can find more information on the Fast India website as well as their LinkedIn page, their Twitter page, and so on. My thanks to my team as well at Asian Century Foundation. It's been wonderful to see you guys work so closely with Fast India, as well as the offices of our panelists, Smriti in particular, and our colleagues Samir and Akshat. I think thank you so much to the attendees. I think right now alone we have 250. We had almost 300 attendees at one point. It's been fantastic to be able to share these perspectives with you, and we really hope that you internalize some of what's been discussed and look this up yourself. Last but most, I would really like to thank Professor Bambang and Dr. Mashito, and I also see Brian from Professor Bambang's office. Thank you so much for your kind participation. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your incredibly interesting viewpoints. We hope to keep engaging with you as we go forward. This is hopefully the first of many such discussions. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday.
Okay. Thank you. Terima
Thank you,
kasih.
Anumita.
Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you,
so
Ambashi-san.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Arigato.
Professor.